everyone. Happy to see you back. So if it is your first time joining us because you missed session 1, no worries. We are happy to have you here. If you are back again, you'll see a new face and a familiar face. So I'm excited for today's session. But just to give you a little housekeeping here as well. We have the recording from session 1, so if you'd like that, I will be sending it out to you in email as well. And if you missed it, don't forget that we do require you to watch the recording in full and send 1 to 3 insights to me via email. So you'll be getting that in combination. We're going to do it just to cut down on emails. I'll send recordings 1 and 2 to you, most likely early next week, so you have those. But you do still have some time before you have to complete those for 1-on-1 to advising appointments to open. So really excited that you are continuing down the consulting journey, kind of taking over with your career before you get here to Simon. And we have a really exciting session. So a little bit different than last week's. We have an interactive component of it. So start to think if you are open and willing to participate as the group. Kevin and Bruce will lead us through that. So without further ado, Kevin and Bruce, I will turn it over to you.
Okay, and I'll start. I'll share my screen. And make sure that I do this. There we go. So today, we're going to talk about mastering the fit interview. Even if you haven't started, don't feel confident about your story, or don't know what consulting firms look for in the fit interview, you can still master the fit interview. So first, we want to thank Simon Business School for inviting us here today. Yay, go Simon. What is, by the way, what is the mascot? Do you guys have a mascot?
We are the Yellow Jackets.
The Yellow Jackets, that's like the I was going to say
kind of like a bumblebee.
The bumblebee, there we go. And so today's workshop is for anyone who is considering management consulting as a career or already decided consulting as a career path, but is worried their interview skills aren't enough to land an offer. Okay, so let's make sure the chat function is working. And so everyone imagine 2 months from now, you have your offer at a consulting firm. Which firm are you at that point? What is your dream consulting firm? And someone, for Kevin's sake, please put in Bain, because last time we just didn't get it, but.
Thanks, Katie.
But Kevin, I can say if I go back to consulting, I mean, recruiting at a consulting firm, it'll probably be with Bain, because the people from Bain I've met have been really cool.
Much appreciated.
So let's take a look. What do we got? Bain, McKinsey, BCG. Who else is out there?
I feel like we're sticking with the big names. We don't have any boutique ones coming in this time around. So
Also consulting group, okay. Okay, so let's these are good goals. This is great. And so let me minimize that and let me go. So if you stay till the very end today, we're going to find out what firms look for in the fit interview. And we're going to also learn how you can answer the fit questions to land offers with live practice. And also you will gain access to free resources to help you get your offer. So that's if you stay to the very end. Okay, so everyone stay tuned. Don't go away. So first I want to introduce myself. My name is Bruce. I was with the Boston Consulting Group for 15 years of recruiting only in the Los Angeles office. I am currently writing children's books. I have 5 of them out right now. I write them and illustrate them as well. And I'm a recruiting coach at my consulting office. So I'm the person that helps with the resumes and the cover letters. And also just tells people, answers those silly questions that you just don't want to ask a regular recruiter at the firm. So the picture on the left, this is me enjoying the snow in Sapporo. I really enjoy the snow, and the reason why is because I'm born and raised in Southern California, and I haven't really lived in a snowy area. So I've never had to shovel snow. So that's probably one of the reasons why I love it so much, because I just enjoy it. And then I hop in a car or a plane and fly away, and I don't have to deal with the real life snow situations. So that's about me. So now let's hear about Kevin.
All right. Well, good morning, everyone. Excited to be here today. So quick intro. So my name's Kevin. I was at Bain for about 5 years in the Los Angeles and San Francisco office. I also helped co-found one of the new practice areas that they have, which is their innovation practice, which is primarily focused on trying to connect our corporate clients with entrepreneurs, innovators, new business models, accelerators, venture capital firms, what have you, to help them disrupt themselves before the broader market would disrupt them. Since leaving, I've done a number of pieces, done a number of different companies. Now I'm at a company called Path, which focuses on connecting people who are seeking therapy with therapists and psychiatrists that are in network for them, so they don't have to use cash to pay. But part-time, what I do is I'm a case coach at my consulting offer. I've been doing this for about a couple of years at this point. Between MCO and my time at Bain and my time before that, I've probably done at least 1,000 cases at this point. So I've got a pretty good sense of what good looks like. And excited to share a little bit more about, at least on the fit side with you today, sort of what we look for when we're interviewing people. And then on a personal note, so I'm married, I have a daughter, that's her on her first birthday. She just turned 2 the other month. So I'll update that photo shortly.
Great. So let's talk a little bit about my consulting offer. So what is my consulting offer? So my consulting offer was started in about 5 years ago. And you'll quite often hear us refer to it as MCO. And it's helped over 500 students land management and strategy consulting jobs across 5 continents and 31 firms. And it's the only organization to have specialized plans for master's and MBA students pursuing consulting. Our clients call us the closest thing to guaranteeing a job in consulting. And if you want proof of that, you can go to the MCO website and you'll find lots and lots of testimonials. People who've gone through the program have been very successful at it and just want to tell other people how great it is. MCO has an 85% success rate compared to the general applicant. I remember seeing thousands and thousands of applications come through, and then whittling those down to first rounds, and then whittling those down to decision rounds, and then whittling those down to offers. And that's when you look at the screen on the right, that is very legitimately how hard it is to get into a consulting firm, as opposed to MCO success rate, which is 85% of the people that get at least 1 or more offers from consulting, and especially from McKinsey, Bain, or BCG. About 25% of the people that we work with get offers from those firms. So how recruiting works: first, you have to decide to apply. Then you get the interview, and then you pass the interview. Simple, right? So passing the interview, and that's the focus for today. And so that's where I'm going to hand this off to Kevin, and Kevin's going to talk about passing the interview.
All righty, let's do it. So I'm going to share my screen now.
Stop sharing.
Let's see. Here we go. Okie dokie. Okay, loading. And can you see the screen? Bruce, is this coming up?
Yeah, we got it.
Beautiful. Okay. Again, excited to chat with you today. There's a number of dimensions to what consulting firms look for. The case is obviously one of those pieces, but fit is also incredibly important. So we're going to talk about what fit in behavioral looks like today, sort of how we evaluate it when we're sitting on the interviewer side, and sort of how you can best present yourself to make sure that your best foot is forward. So we're going to talk about 3 different pieces today. First is at a high level, like how to pass the fit interview. And so like what things exactly is a interviewer looking to see? The second is how to come up with your answers. So how to make sure like you've got the right stories, you're talking about the right themes, you're framing in the right light. So you're putting your best foot forward. And last is we're going to do a live component to this, where we're actually going to ask for volunteers that can put forth a story. I'll provide some feedback. We'll go back and forth a little bit, and then it's open up to Q&A. So again, This session is just for you. There's 23 people here now. I do sessions for 200, 300 people, in which case, like, it's a little bit tougher to have like a true Q&A open dialogue. For a group this size, it's small enough to where truly any questions that you have, like, you should feel free to ask. We can address anything that's top of mind for you. So the more interactive you make this, the more and more value I think you'll get out of it. If not, I'm happy just to talk and we'll go from there. Okay, so all right, great. So again, the much vaunted case interview, people usually spend 95 to 100% of their time in prep for the case interview, and to a certain extent for good reason, because the case interview is a very large piece of how we as interviewers determine whether or not you have the intellectual horsepower and the client-facing capacity to be a good consultant. That, however, is insufficient. And so what we also look for is we look for someone to pass a fit interview, so to speak. And there's a lot of different varieties for what this looks like, and I'm going to get into them in a little bit. But at a very high level, a fit interview is a way for the interviewer to understand like who you are, examples of you exhibiting certain character traits or values, and really just sort of pressure testing whether or not they'd even enjoy working with you. And this can be as simple as one question, let's just pull it from your resume. It could be a broader question, a set of questions. It could be a 30-minute session. Depends on the firm, depends on the interviewer, depends on how you've performed so far. But it takes a whole variety of different shapes and sizes. And so this is just a little quick blurb from each of a handful of major consulting firms and sort of why they value fit. So quick from McKinsey, a partner said, "We can teach you how to make slides in PowerPoint or build models in Excel, but we can't teach character and values." And so again, you being able to demonstrate certain values, certain examples of how you've projected those values, like that's really valuable to interviewers as you're going through the process. Bain, we get plenty of smart, able candidates, which is true. We want to find ones that we can see working here and want to work with. Absolutely. As a Bain interviewer, I can attest to it. And then for BCG, candidates will spend hundreds and more hours on casing, but when the fit interview begins, it's like they didn't see it coming. And the nice thing about the fit is that it's sort of the most within your control, because it's your stories, right? Like there's no real curveball that can be thrown. Like it's you. With cases, you never totally know what you're going to get, but with fit, if you go through the right preparation process, you should be able to knock it out of the park. So high level, one of the things that we look for when we are interviewing folks is we are looking for them to pass what's known as the airport test. Many of you have maybe heard of this before. Some of you may have not, but really what the airport test basically means is you as consultants spend a tremendous amount of time, in many cases, on the road. And you're flying to clients, you're flying to meet with whomever it is. Sometimes the airplanes may get delayed because it's an airport and it's real life. And so you are usually going to be in the airport with your case team, namely like, your manager and a handful of consultants and associates that you work with. What we're looking for in a fit interview, so to speak, is like, if I was stuck in an airport with you when the airline is delayed, would I be dreading that experience? Or would I actually kind of enjoy it because I actually enjoy talking to you? This is kind of colloquially known as the airport test. There's another way to look at it, the traffic test, especially if you're like in New York City or LA, wherever there's lots of traffic and you're in a car with your team. If you're stuck in traffic, are you kind of like dreading being in traffic because you don't want to spend time with this person, or you're actually kind of enjoying the process because you're learning from this person, you're getting a lot out of being around this person. So those couple tests, airport tests, traffic tests, they're just sort of, again, like cheeky terms that we use to sort of try to exemplify what we're looking for. So now that being said, every firm is different. So one answer that works great for Accenture may not be the best for BCG, which may not be the best for Deloitte, so on and so forth. So again, I'm going to show you just a quick overview of at least a few firms for like what values they pride themselves on. So let's look at McKinsey, BCG, and Bain. So some values here. So McKinsey, like they're very, very high on leadership. best and brightest. We've got everyone across the globe that is like always in the top of their charts. And they also really prioritize entrepreneurial drive of like what people go and do, not just at McKinsey, but beyond McKinsey. BCG, and Bruce can probably attest to this, is like really, really promoting curiosity, like and intellectual honesty and unlocking insights. And like, am I thinking about this the right way? Am I thinking about this differently enough? Am I bringing something new to this? Like, that's the value they're really pushing. And then for Bain, it's like, yes, it's similar entrepreneurial drive that you get to McKinsey, but there's also a value of, are you a culture carrier for your office, for your firm? Are you bringing everyone up around you and making them a better person? I'm not saying these values don't bleed into one another, but these values are at a high level sort of what each of the firms purports. And I can at least tell you, for at least being at Bain, this is absolutely what Bain pushes. If you take a step below that, like, what are their social values? Again, McKinsey, big global firm. It's the biggest of the three. And so like, how do we bring awareness to global issues? BCG is really sort of tight knit. Like, how do we prioritize community and family? I think it's the only one of these three firms that for company offsites, like annual offsites, like they bring partners and spouses. They allow them to come. So like, they're very big on family in that sense. And for Bain, like, social impact is a really big one. Like, I can tell you at Bain, we had social impact days every year. And so we'd go, like, I've personally volunteered like out in the, like, in the Presidio in San Francisco, like weeding invasive species. I've worked on painting and revamping public schools. Like, I've worked with Boys and Girls Clubs. Like, these are all things that we've done at Bain, and Bain takes time to do that. Last is like internal mottos. And so McKinsey was founded by someone named Marvin. And so the lens that they really try to empower each of their consultants and associates to take is like, what would Marvin do in this circumstance? Like, think about yourself as like a true intellectually honest business owner. Like, what would you do? BCG, again, Bruce can probably attest to it, is like unlocking insights. How are you thinking about this differently than someone has thought about it before? And Bain is a Bainey never lets another Bainey fail, namely meaning, and I can speak to this too, I early on in my time at Bain was struggling with a model. It was, I think, 11:30 at night. And there was someone from another case team that was in the office who was also working. And I was able to ask him, like, hey, look, I'm stuck here. And he took time away very late at night to come over and help me, because he knows, like, it's a pay it forward type situation. Like, he's happy to help. He doesn't want Bainies to fail. And similarly, on my 5-year tenure at Bain, like, it's something that you pay forward. So again, like, as you think about your fit answers, like, tailoring this a little bit to the firm is quite helpful. And so it's like, well, Kevin, that's great. Like, how do I even know, like, what these firms are looking for? And so there's a few ways to do this. The first is, you should be leaning on any network that you have to try to glean whatever insights they may have about what it's like to work there and sort of what they value above all else. Second is, aside from just your own personal network, a lot of these firms, like, they do meet and greets, like they do company campus presentations, like the coffee chats, like whatever it may be. You should take them up on that. It's a really good way to ask genuine questions, and not just sort of check the box type questions. Like, really try to understand what makes the firm tick and what makes people differentiated within the firm. And then last is something like a Glassdoor. Like, the nice thing about Glassdoor is that people post their interview experience, they post what it's like to work there. I mean, you can get a good sense quite quickly of what it's like just by looking at these three avenues. And just really quickly on Glassdoor, like, again, don't take my word for it. You can look on Glassdoor, Bainey never lets another Bainey fail, right? Like, you can see some of these pieces and some examples of how that works. And so if you just spend a little bit of time going through these different channels, like, you'll start to piece together sort of what each of the firms is really prioritizing. So it's not a one size fits all on your fit interview. So again, as you have questions that come up, like, feel free to use the chat, feel free to use the Q&A. Like, I want to make this as interactive as possible. In the meantime, we'll still talk through at a high level what each of these interviews are. So you have two types of fit or behavioral interviews. You have inch deep and mile wide, and inch wide and mile deep. Namely meaning, in one set, like for BCG, for instance, inch deep and mile wide. You will be asked a number of questions. You will be expected to give sort of pithy 1 to 2 minute answers. And then you'll move on to the next question. So they're just trying to get a snapshot of you across a whole set of different questions. Vice versa, with someone like McKinsey, it is, we're only going to ask you one question, but we're going to go really deep and just drill into that. Like you give some answer, like, well, why did they say that? And then what was the result? And how did that make you feel? And then how is it perceived? Like they really, really go deep to make sure they understand the overall situation versus just sort of taking your word for it at like a 10,000 foot view level. So let's start with like the inch deep, mile wide type questions that are most common to come up. And by the way, like this right here is gold. Like if you're gonna like take a snapshot, like I know we're gonna send this screen, we're gonna send that recording out later. Like, but if you're gonna snapshot and you're gonna write things down, like this is the slide, because this is overwhelmingly what comes up in these interviews. So there's two real lenses to look at this through. You can be asked questions where it's like you as an individual, like how have you done this? Or what are your perceptions? And then it's you in relation to others, like how have you worked with others or how have you led others? And so if you look at the you as an individual and this big four right here, these are the ones that come up more than anything else. Like I can tell you unequivocally, like I've had to answer one of these four questions, or I've asked one of these four questions in every single interview I've participated in or I've been a part of. So, you know, for personal values, tell me about yourself. This is a really, really high level, like you could take it a whole bunch of ways question. And so making sure you have like the right approach to this is really important. I'll talk about that in a handful of slides, but tell me about yourself, walk me through your resume. Less common, but important for you to know how to do that in a thematic type way versus just stating each bullet. Why management consulting? This is a really important one because people can kind of see right through it if you're just going through the motions. You need to have some genuine reason why. And then potentially like why this firm, why Bain, why Accenture, why Deloitte, why LEK, whatever it is you're interested in. And then there's a handful more questions on the individual side. So, you know, entrepreneurial drive, like when was the time you had to make changes based on a new circumstance? Like your ability to pivot, your ability to lead something and then pivot based on how, you know, new circumstances emerge. Problem solving, a time where you dealt with a tough problem. These really are the primary ones on the individual side. Now, for you in relation to others, this again is going to be talking more about like how you work and play with others. So on the leadership side, tell me about a time where you led others. Like this could be something from you being on campus. This could be something from, you know, your professional experience. This could be something from your personal experience, like whatever it is, like how have you exhibited leadership? Personal impact, like when did you have to convince someone to your way of thinking? I rather like this one because it shows your ability, it demonstrates your ability to exert indirect influence on someone who you may not actually be managing. And so in a lot of consulting is like your ability to influence clients, influence partners, influence people to your way of thinking, even if you don't have like true control or power over them. Being fun to work with, I used to ask this question a lot of like, what do you like to do for fun? Like, honestly, I think this one should be you as an individual, but this is a fairly common question. Humility. When was the last time you were wrong? This is a really good one. Like failure is another way that we ask this one because we're trying to understand, like, are you willing to share when you fail? Or are you sort of putting on this bravado and you're putting on the shield around us? Like, can you talk about when you failed and what you learned from it? And then coachability, like not only just tell me about a time you failed, but like what happened or what have you sort of taken feedback and pivoted based on that? A lot of consulting is even if you're the smartest person in your class, you will be humbled and you need to be able to take feedback and improve based on that feedback. And so coachability aspect is something that we test. So again, like just know these questions are the common ones, know those big four questions are the most common among them common, and be prepared to speak to these, at least at like a 2-minute level. And so this is your inch deep set of questions. Your mile deep questions, where you'll only be asked one of these in an interview, is like, again, like the entrepreneurial drive one. McKinsey recently pivoted to this particular question where they're saying, you know, when was the time you had to make changes based on a new circumstance? So again, think about how think about some example in which you've had to pivot based on something changing or something new that's emerging. And what was the result of that? Leadership, they're really big on leadership, and then personal impact, when you had to convince someone to your way of thinking. These are the three things that McKinsey really, really wants you to nail down. So if you're specifically interested in McKinsey, you need a deep story. Like, you need to be able to go like multiple layers deep, talk about who talked to whom and what was the process, and really go deep, not just have your 2-minute story ready, but have like a 15-minute story ready. That's not to say you should just filibuster and talk for 15 minutes in these interviews. You should give your 2-minute story, but be prepared when the interviewer follows up with questions to answer those questions. Because in this case, for these mile-wide ones, an inch deep, mile wide, the interviewer typically won't have follow-ups, or at least not many. In these questions, the mile deep ones, they will have several follow-up questions, and it will probably take 10, 15 minutes for you to fully get through the story. So those are like the types of questions that you'll see, what the expectations are based on the firm, like what the expectations are with regard to depth, but ultimately, like, what is a good answer? A lot of people practice word for word what they're going to say, but it's not necessarily just the words, right? Most of communication is, it's done in stories, it's done non-verbally, it's done with gestures or whatever it may be. And the reason for that is because, again, it's not just the words, but it's how it makes you feel. Interviewers, if you put the hat on of the interviewer, again, I've done hundreds of interviews. A typical day of interviewing for me when I was interviewing people at Bain is I would interview somewhere between 8, 10, 12, 14 people in a day. And so, you can imagine, like, as an interviewer, they start to bleed together a little bit. Like, it gets difficult by the end of the day to like truly parse out, oh, okay, person number 3 versus person number 5, person number 7. And so, the way that the dirty little secret is that, we're not taking every single word down that you say, but we are remembering how you made me feel. And that feeling is something that you can invoke with your stories if they are done in the right manner. And so here's sort of how we address it. And so, again, tell stories. So here is the general framework that we suggest, and I've seen it work a lot. So it's called the A-STARE framework. So I'll sort of walk through exactly what this is. So first is the A, which is answer. So typically when I ask you a question, like, tell me about a time where you led others, and then you just start going off on, well, there was this one time when I talked to so-and-so and I started, and then we did this thing and this thing and this thing. It's like, I have no idea where this is going. As an interviewer, I don't know where this is going. So what we typically recommend is you give a 1-sentence answer that can frame for the interviewer, like, what is the story going to involve? And now I at least know, okay, great. As an interviewer, I have an understanding of the direction this is going to go. And so it's almost like the spark notes for me, like, great, now you can proceed and I can follow this a little bit more clearly. The next thing that we encourage is the situation. So the situation is now, okay, great. You've given your 1-sentence quick answer. Now it's, okay, now you need to frame this for me. So when did this happen? Who was there? Where was this? Like, give me some basics that I would need to, are there any terms I need to know? Like, give me some basics that I need to understand the core of the story of what's happening in the background, like what's led up to this moment. This next part is probably the most important. This next part is the tension. Now, I've had many, many people with perfect SAT scores, top of their class, whatever, and they come in and they tell me some story and they basically talk about how amazing they are. I did this, and then 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 I succeeded. It's like, that's a pretty boring story, to be honest with you. People typically want to see how you overcome something. Think about literally any movie you've ever watched. It's not just this linear path that just moves directly towards amazingness and there's no challenges along the way, right? Like, there's the hero's journey that people want to see, whether they admit to it or not. And so showing what you've been able to overcome, whether it's self-inflicted, societally inflicted, whatever it may be, showing that there is a tension that's been introduced is really critical to building a character arc to the story that is gripping for you. And so being able to paint what that conflict is, we highly encourage that, because that is where it becomes memorable. That's where you start to actually have interviewer on their seat of like, oh, and so then what happened? But if you don't paint the situation beforehand, you just go straight to the tension. And it's like, you don't have the interviewer does not have the context to sit on the edge of their seat. They have to have the context, and then you can lead them into the tension. And it's like, well, okay, great. After you've set the tension of like, okay, what's the issue? Okay, great. So there's this issue. How are you going to overcome that? Then you need to talk about the action. And it's not just broader actions that society took or anything took. It's like, what did you specifically do as a person to resolve this? And so talk me through that. Like what took place? Next, what was the result of this? Cool, great, you did this thing, but like, did it work? Like, what happened? And so talk me through like what the ultimate result was. And then finally, like, and this is sort of optional, depends on the question, but like, what's the ultimate takeaway here? Like, what did you learn from the story? What's the lesson? What's something that you are now applying moving forward that you didn't necessarily before this incident happened to you? Again, if you take a step back, this framework, again, gives a quick snapshot to the interviewer so they know what you're going to talk about, or they know the theme that you're going to be hitting on. And then you lead them through this arc of a story that follows the normal hero's journey that typically movies and books and TV shows and whatever it is usually follow, that are good. Because at the end of the day, people remember stories more so than they remember like the exact content. They remember stories, they remember fables, they remember how it makes them feel. Those are the things that stick in like the deep part of your brain that you can't always articulate why it resonates with you, but it is something that resonates with you. So now I want to give you an example of what good looks like here. Because again, great, Kevin, this is great in theory. How do I actually do this? So let's walk through that. Once my computer stops freezing. Great. Okay, so here's an example from Davis. And like Bruce mentioned earlier, Davis is our founder. He is lights out brilliant. So I feel very fortunate that he decided that I could help work with him on at MCO. But here's a story that he used back when he was applying and interviewing at Bain and other consulting firms. So step number one, this is what Davis used, is what we encourage our clients to use. Step number one, figure out the stories that demonstrate some value. What I mean by this is like, we as interviewers want to understand deeply what makes you tick, right? I've already shared a bunch of values that the firms themselves exhibit. Maybe those values are perfectly aligned with yours, maybe they're not, but like, what value do you cherish above all else, or have you demonstrated above all else? And so for Davis, the story, or at least the value that he wanted to portray in these interviews, was grit, namely meaning like your ability to sort of like grit your teeth, get through it, persevere, and see something through. So that's what he wanted to demonstrate. And so what stories does he have that can demonstrate this? And he sort of mapped out a handful of like, one sentence lines based on his experience, in college, any professional career he had, high school, whatever, that demonstrated in his mind these different values, or this particular value. And so once you think through what your value is, and you've got a high level understanding of, I think there's some things I could talk about, pick one of those stories and then work through it. Pick one of those themes and work through it. So now let's apply this one of him getting rejected by 200 scholarships, but still applying as a starting point for how to demonstrate grit in these interviews. And so let's imagine that he's asked, well, Davis, tell me about yourself. And he wants to use grit as the theme. And in particular, this story of getting rejected by 200 scholarships, but still applying. So let's apply the ASTAIR model. Again, answer, situation, tension, action, result, effect. How does that work in theory or in practice? So answer, one thing people tell me is that I don't give up easily. Really good one sentence answer, because I, as the interviewer, have a general understanding of like, okay, perseverance is something he's going to talk about. Okay. And I'm kind of curious, like, where is this going to go? Like I now have a general sense of like the theme he's going to hit, and I want to learn more. So it's been framed for me at a high level of what value he's trying to push. Now he has to lay the stage for what the context is. So situation. Before moving to New Haven for college, I grew up in a low-income community where going to college was a dream, but not an expectation for most kids. I grew up in a community where our school system was called the worst in the United States. Okay, so now we've got a good understanding of Davis and his background, because that's what he's going to talk about in this case. Next, what is the conflict now? So his answer, growing up, I knew I wanted to be the first person in my family to go to college and live up to the dreams of my parents and grandparents who gave up everything to come to America so I could have this chance. The problem was I didn't have a role model, since my teachers and counselors were figuring out how to keep students from starting fights, dropping out, or going to jail. But I knew I wanted to go to the best university I could and graduate debt-free. Okay, so there's this tension, right? Like, he's already set the stage of like, he's not on a great school system, low-income community, like college is not the expectation. But for him, he wanted to do this. He wanted to be the first person. He wanted to be able to graduate college debt-free. Teachers aren't really able to give him much attention because they're putting out fires versus being able to be proactive with him on his dreams that are well beyond what his typical community expects. So what does he do? Like, what actions did he take? So to fund my way to college, since I didn't understand financial aid, I decided to make a list of 200 scholarships my sophomore year, and I started applying to every single scholarship I could find, including one called Women Entering Technology. Over 3 years, 179 rejected me, and I hung them on my bedroom wall to remind myself that I was still alive and to keep going. Every time I was rejected, I would ask for feedback and use it on my next application. Great. So he's now talked about, like, again, he's talked about before how like finance are top of mind. He doesn't really have a guide or a mentor here. And so now it's like, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to take a very systematic approach. I'm going to throw a bunch of darts. I'm going to try to learn as much as I can, but keep going. And okay, great. But what happened? Eventually, I started winning scholarships based on the feedback I incorporated until I received over $1.5 million in scholarship money, including full scholarships to Harvard and Yale. So I'll pause here really quickly. I don't have a story that's this good. This just happens to be a really good story, but it is demonstrating like I never got anywhere close to that kind of scholarship money. But this is demonstrating again, like, okay, great. Like you did this, you got a whole bunch of applications out, like, but what happened? There was a success, there was a result, and that's a really interesting one. And then what's the takeaway? Like, what did you learn from the story? While this event took place in high school, I think it tells you a lot about me that I don't give up. At Yale, I might not be the smartest, but no one is going to outwork me. And in my extracurriculars, I might not have the connections to raise a lot of money right away, but you will bet I will knock on doors and send cold emails to make sure I can raise what we need. So, like, if you now look at this, take a step back, this is the overall story. The story is about a 2-minute story. And it's a good one because it follows that arc. It's interesting. And so, you don't have to have gotten $1 million of scholarship money. You don't have to have invented something incredible. You don't have to have like gone on to start some rock band or met the president or whatever. You don't have to have anything that's that extreme. But you being able to follow an arc, a story arc that's similar to this one is really, really interesting versus someone who just said, like, I wanted to get scholarships. I ended up getting a bunch of scholarships. I got the scholarships. Like, cool. The outcome is the same, but the way you get there is very different. And one's going to stand out in the interviewer's mind and the other one is not. So the way in which you convey the story is important. And again, the nice thing here is there's a theme throughout this too. And so making sure your stories are thematic, namely that there's some value that you're trying to portray throughout the course of that story is really critical. So again, like you apply similar framework, the similar A-STAR framework to the others, and then you pick the best 3 you think, and you just refine and you get ready for those. And the reason why we say 3 is because you will probably have, especially in your first interview, 2 people that are interviewing you, maybe 3. And if they all ask you the same tell me about yourself question or leadership question or whatever it is, they'll ask you the same question. You want to be able to have different examples you can pull from. So it doesn't seem like you're just a one-trick pony. Like, cool, that's a good story, but is that the only time you demonstrated that? And if, the 2 or 3 interviewers all get the exact same story from you, then it's like, well, good story, but like maybe there isn't that much more depth because it's the only one you can think of. So you want to have some more of these in your back pocket. And again, another reason for this too is like, there's probably some nuances between these stories that highlight certain values, like micro values more than others. And so depending on the firm, you may want to go with one versus the other. And then just go and repeat this process for all these other categories, right? Like think through all these other categories, like how you can use a similar framework, how you can, like what kind of examples you're going to give, and then be prepared to talk to them. Again, the nice thing is, unlike cases where you don't know the case you're going to get, but you can like get yourself prepared for cases in general, here you know the questions you're going to get. I'm giving you the cheat sheet right now, and you know your own life story. And so if as long as you can frame it in the right way and you can make it compelling, then this is something that you'll knock it out of the park every time. So the last thing before I move on to the next section is I want to give you some perspective on George Clooney, who we all know. So George Clooney, early in his career, he consistently struck out in these auditioning interviews. And it was in large part because he was timid, and he, of course, he wanted to put his best foot forward, but spent his time wondering like, oh, like, are they going to like me? What's going to happen? Like he just kind of got in his own head. And then one day, he was coached by someone to better understand like this auditioning director, this casting director isn't just going through the motions because they want to deny everyone. Like they're actively they want you to succeed. They're spending the hours because they want you to succeed. And once that clicked of like, oh, the interviewer or the casting director, whomever it is, like they're not putting me through this gauntlet because they're trying to screw with me. They're doing this because they actually want me to succeed. They want to see me rise to the occasion. And once that switch in his mind of like the person who is the casting director actually wants me to succeed, he became very, very, very successful. Doesn't hurt that he's also super handsome. But that mindset is a really, really good reminder of like, you could apply that to consulting. I, as an interviewer, do not want to spend 8 hours of my day interviewing people to not pass anyone. I want to pass as many people as I can. And I want you to succeed in that interview. Just recognize that. So when the interviewer is not out to get you, so to speak, we want to see you rise to the occasion. We're very excited to be interviewing you. We're taking time out of our day because you are the future of our company. We cannot exist. Consulting is only based on the people. There's no other product. So we want you as a person to succeed. And so if you keep that in mind, you keep this George Clooney mindset in mind, like it does help with confidence, and it does help you understand a little bit like, okay, the interviewer is actually on my side.
Okay, Kevin.
Yep.
After all that, all I got out of that was like you're looking for good-looking people.
Yep. We're looking for George Clooney's. That's basically it.
But I had a question because it kind of threw me a little bit when I was looking at your the list, and the question was, what is the most recent time you failed?
Mm-hmm.
How old can your stories be? Because that one.
How long?
Yeah. How far back can you go?
Oh, how far back can you go?
Yeah.
I mean, look, it's you were looking for impact. You're looking for, I've seen some people that have gone back to high school and given good stories from high school. As I assume you're looking at this from the lens of like someone in the audience right now. Yeah, I think you can go back to high school as far as failure. But it's got to be something that like you truly learned from, and you apply it today, and it's not like a strength of yours today or something like that. Basically, the further you go back, like the more impactful the story has to be, the more it really redefined who you are. The more recent, the more you can get away with like it not being as character changing. But the further back you go, sort of the more of a like perspective shift that needs to have demonstrated for you.
Okay. So if it's a really great story, you can go pretty far back.
Yeah. And so I typically encourage people like, as they're brainstorming, right? Like, don't feel inhibited by like, oh, it's got to be something I did within the last 3 years. Not necessarily.
Yeah.
I even seen people give really good stories from like their childhood. It just depends on like, you know, I've seen people give like entrepreneurial leadership stories from like when they were 10. And, you know, it talks about like, and then how they became an Eagle Scout and how they then like have taken this and sort of it's morphed into what they do today.
Mhm.
So it just depends on the theme you're trying to portray and what's the best example that sort of typifies that theme.
Okay. And we have a question as well. What could I expect from a fit behavioral interview? A one-on-one, a panel interview, or a group of candidate interviews?
Yeah. Overwhelmingly, this will be one-on-one behavioral fit. At least that's the case for BCG, Bain, and McKinsey. There are some exceptions to this for some other firms. Some firms do have panel interviews. Some firms do have like group candidate interviews, but they're rare. And again, this is why like, and it's not just different by like firm, it's also differs by office. And so the best way to research, aside from working with us, the best way to research is also just like go to Glassdoor, like go and talk to people at the company. Like they will give you a very, very good sense of what the expectations are. But overwhelmingly, especially for MBB firms, McKinsey, Bain, BCG, it's one-on-one.
Okay, great.
Cool. Okay, so again, like just to zoom out, like when it comes to your fit, spend time with a fit so you can pass the airport test. Like know which questions are most likely to come up. Depending on the firm, use this ACE-DARE format to create great answers that an interviewer remembers. And then again, above all else, remember that your interviewer wants you to succeed. They're not looking to pick-point failures, that they want you to succeed. So cool. We've like talked about like how to pass the fit interview. Now let's figure out how to come up with some answers here. So this is where like we're going to do this more interactive today. And so I'm going to share some common question that typically comes up from these fit interviews. I'll ask for a volunteer. Again, like think about this as like a truly, truly non-evaluative way to get feedback from someone that's done hundreds of interviews and knows what we're looking for. So do it if you like, don't do it if you don't like, but like, I don't work for Bain. I don't report back to Bain. Bruce won't do that for BCG. It doesn't matter. Like this is truly, truly non-evaluative. So we'll ask for volunteers that just want to practice. And so I'll give feedback. Here's what you did well. Here's room for improvement. They'll give the answer again. I'll give some more feedback, and then like the audience can answer questions, and then we'll move on to another question. So, you know, we've got like 40 minutes-ish left. I want to leave 10 minutes at the end for Bruce and sort of him to talk about like general themes and learnings and how MCO can help you. But for the next 30 minutes, like we can work specifically on this. And again, the more interactive it is, the more you get out of it. And so with that, let's see, make sure it's not frozen. Here we go. Okay. So the first question I've got, and I want to give you guys a minute or two to sort of think through this, but the first question I've got is the leadership one. So tell me about a time where you led others. So I would love, again, we can take 30 seconds, a minute, but I'd love for someone, you know, after that time has elapsed, who would like to practice to raise their hand in the attendee box, and then we can do this live, and we'll workshop it live. So I'll pause.
Kevin,
Yep.
quick question: Would I make them visible?
Yeah. So you don't necessarily need to make them visible.
Okay.
I just need to hear their voice, because we'll keep this slide up.
Okay.
Cool. So let's pause, think for like a minute about some story that you would like to workshop, and we'll go from there. Okay, so what I'd love is if someone's interested in participating, feel free to raise your hand. If not, I think Katie's also mentioned that she's happy to do it live. But again, it's a workshop for you guys. So if you're interested, I'm happy to work.
We have someone who just raised their hand.
Beautiful.
Saptarishi. So we're going to allow to talk. Is that cool?
Let's do it.
Okay.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh my God. Okay, I have a dog around, so I'm not sure if it's gonna bother. Wait, 1 second.
All good.
Yeah, hi.
Hi. Okay, so yeah, so the question is, just like an interview, tell me about a time where you've led others.
So this story is about my undergraduate when I was the chief editor of my college's newsletter club, Renaissance. When I actually started leading the club, the corona pandemic had just hit. And one of the biggest challenges that I faced during this time was how I had to lead a team in a completely virtual environment, as well as give them enough motivation in this very difficult time to work together to publish magazines. Realized right that time communication was completely broken. That time we just had a WhatsApp group, and all the messages used to just come there. And back when I had in-person meetings, it was much easier. But now that everything was online, it became really difficult. So I set out to fix those things from the ground up. And first, I started off with setting up a Discord, which would have everything organized very well. And then I started having to just keep the morale up for the whole team. I started having weekly meetings where we would not just talk about the current project that we had, but we also would talk about a few other things and just get in touch with all the team members on a constant basis. I realized that doing this made sure that everyone was a part of the team and everyone would also participate more in the club. And in the end, we were able to publish 2 magazines online as well as 1 magazine in a physical format. And I think that was a great experience where I led other people. Yeah, I guess that's about it.
Last notes right now.
I'm going to mute myself then.
Okay, so some quick feedback. So I do generally like the story. I do think it's an interesting one. I think that, so again, if we sort of work through the ACE-THEIR method. So first, you gave some form of a quick 1-sentence answer. I know how to improve it, but you gave a quick 1-sentence answer. You gave me some background about sort of like you're leading the club, like sort of went from this transition from in-person to virtual, and like you gave some tension. Again, I think there was an opportunity to build the tension, but I'll talk about that in a little bit. And then what the action was. What the action was, what the result was, and then the takeaway was kind of missing. I think I froze a bit. Okay, and maybe I missed things because I do think there was a little bit. I think there was a little bit of a freeze. But so some general feedback for I think how to improve your story, because again I like the core of it. So first, like for the 1-sentence answer, you want to share like ideally you want to share like the value or like the overall story versus just they're going to share a story where I was an undergrad chief editor for this club. A better 1-sentence answer could be something along the lines of, I want to tell you about a time where I was able to lead a team through the transition, effectively lead a team through the transition from being only an in-person club to actually being able to navigate like a virtual environment. Like, cool, I now have a better sense of like what you're about to show, like what you're about to exhibit. Or you can, so that you can talk about it from that lens. You can also talk about the value of like, I want to tell you about a story. I want to tell you about a time where I had to really use like innovation and motivation, like innovation and organizing people in order to accomplish a goal. Something along those lines. Again, like one of those, you're talking a little bit more about like what's happened. One of them, you're talking a little bit more about the theme, but either of those are a little bit clearer as far as like what the interviewer is now going to expect. And so now as you're getting into like the setting the situation, setting the scene. So you've talked about how I'd set the scene a little bit more as far as like, okay, here's this club and here's what it does. You've made this assumption for the interviewer that they know exactly what this club is. And I sort of figured out down the road, like, oh, it's only from the result, like, oh, it's a club that publishes magazines, but I didn't know that. Like, what's the club? What does it do? Who's involved? How big is the group? Right? Like, and so all those things help me visualize in my mind as the interviewer, like, what exactly is this that we're talking about? Next, then you get to the tension. And you need to, like, this is where I think it was missing. And again, maybe it just broke up. But a really, really pithy tension is a good way to sort of build that arc. And so in this case, when you talk about the tension here can be, so you sort of painted the picture. The big tension here is, the challenge though, is that this is my first time leading a group of people. And not only that, we now had to transform from an in-person club to a virtual club. And not only that, we still had expectations of just how many of these magazines we were trying to publish, but it was very clear early on that the wheels were falling off because all of our existing communication systems just broke. And so I, as a new leader, had to figure out some path forward to not only figure out like how to guide us through this transition from in-person to virtual, but also make us stronger now than we've been in the past. And so, like, again, like, you're sort of setting, like, you've got the situation, now you're setting the tension, now you're starting to move towards the actions, and you can talk about the actions. And I think you did a good job talking about the actions. As far as actions, I said about this I set up a Discord channel, like, I want, like, and you can even up level the action a little bit and start to say, like, above all else, I wanted to focus on digital organization. And so I set up a Discord channel with the primary purpose of having it be focused on what's coming up now and mapping out what's coming in the future, like, and then you can talk about any other things that you did and how you got people on board. And then you talk about the results. And I think the result it speaks for itself. In the end, like, we were able to publish 2 of these magazines online, and the reaction was blah, and like, people within the club said they actually like this mode of working better, or like whatever, so you could talk about the public facing reaction to the magazines, you can talk about the club's reaction to this new way of working, but like a little bit more than just we publish these 2 magazines, because I think you're sort of missing something that's a bigger punch with the story. And then last, I think that when you talk about what the takeaway is, rather than you just saying, this is a great experience where I led people, that's a miss. You want to talk about what the learning is. And so you can say, like, and I'm just making things up right now, but maybe the learning from this is, like, people are willing to adapt so long as they're provided the right leadership and organization and expectations to be able to do so. Like, maybe that's it. Like, I don't know what your learning is, but I don't think this is just something where you say, like, and, all in all, this is a great experience for me exhibiting leadership. This is sort of where you can have that broader takeaway of, like, what's a truism of life, or what's a truism that you're putting forward now that you didn't do before. And so maybe the takeaway is, like, before I used to, and so, like, maybe, like, what I've learned from this is, while I used to sort of rest on existing processes in place to act as a leader, I've now recognized that if not only, like, people have changed, but the situation has changed, like, there's an opportunity to sort of recalibrate expectations and processes to make sure that you're not only, like, responding to the situation in kind, but you're also making the organization much more resistant and much more vibrant. Like, again, I'm just making things up. But all in all, that now paints a really, really rich story. And so I think the core of your story is actually a good one. I do think it's an interesting one that you've brought up. But I think you can refine that a little bit. So with that, like, if you want to take just a minute or two, like, just like take down some notes, let's practice again, and then we'll go from there. Because again, this is just it's a good opportunity for you just to practice this now. So it's not just, oh, that sounds great in theory, but, like, let's actually get some reps in. So if you want to take just a minute, like, jot down some notes and sort of how you want to, better improve the answer, how you want to improve, like, all these pieces based on some of this feedback, and then we can workshop it. Yep. Happy to give you a little bit of time. I know you can't do it immediately.
I had one question though. How do you figure out these things on the fly? Because this was just an example that I remember at that time, but I mean, there are so many possible questions. At the same time, there could be so many possible answers to all of these questions. So how do you know what's the right story to tell? And, like, do you have, like, an a stare method for all of these stories that you have? Or like, do you just keep them in the back of your mind so like you can just access them whenever you want? Does that help?
Yeah. So I can answer half your question. The other half is a little bit more art than science. But so sort of, let me just go back here really quick. Just so long as my computer doesn't freeze. Let's go back. Boop, boop, boop. Okay. So you know, there we go. You know what the questions are going to be. This is going to be 95% of the questions you could even possibly get, right? So you know what the questions are going to be. So you can start by actually creating like an Excel sheet of like, okay, here are the questions. And then you can start to think through, okay, for each of these questions, what are a couple, like, or what are a handful of like stories from my life, or like just like one sentence stories from my life that like could portray, like could answer this well. And then once you sort of figured out, okay, what's a few stories that I think are the best, then you can start to create this framework based on that. And then with your question with regard to like, well, which of these is actually good? That's where you have to actually like practice it with someone. You cannot do this in a vacuum. Similar to casing, where you can't do it in a vacuum. Yeah, you can practice certain skills, but like you will not be a good caser if you just don't do it with people. This one you need to do with people. And ideally you want to do it with someone who doesn't really know you very well. Because if someone knows you well, they can fill in some of the situation holes, they can fill in some of the gaps that you may have missed from your story because they already have the context. Versus if you workshop with someone like me, I have no idea who you are, right? And so I can very clearly point out like, oh, you made this connection here that like to me doesn't make sense, or it seemed like there is a jump in logic that I don't have. Like they can give you that kind of perspective. And then sort of the last, which is sort of a pitch for MCO, like we do this literally all the time. So like, you know, I can tell you transparently, as can other case coaches and other coaches, like I can tell you transparently, like, is this a good story? Is this something that I would remember amidst the story that I'm getting, you know, I'm asking this question 14 times in a day. So unlike cases, where with cases, there's literally like an A through F rubric that we go through. There's a little bit less of that for fit, but we're still looking to say like, is this person value driven? Is this person mission driven? Are they able to communicate things crisply and cleanly? Is there a purpose to the story? Do they not repeat themselves? Like these are things that we look for, but we don't grade it quite along the same grading scale. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, that was a great answer. Thank you so much. And I get the idea of just brainstorming and just trying to figure out what the good stories are, and then just keeping
Start
them.
by casting a wide net. You do not know.
Yeah.
Sorry. And then as you start to workshop, you workshop on your own, you workshop with other people, and you start to converge. It does take a little bit of time, but transparently, it doesn't take as much time as getting really good at casing does. This is something you can do a lot faster. Okay, cool. Take number 2.
Okay, should I start now?
Yeah, so, Tarshi, tell me about a time where you led others.
Okay, so I want to share the story of the time when I was appointed as the chief editor of my college's newsletter club. So Renessa is my college's newsletter club. We're a group of 30 students. We're designers, writers, and a lot more other talented people. And we publish magazines every year, which have something related to the college where I was studying earlier. I became the chief editor of Renessa in 2020. And of course, as we know, that time was the start of the pandemic and everything had started going online. And being a leader at this time was actually very difficult and challenging for me in the starting, because not only were all our meetings going to be held online, but also all of our work had to be done just virtually. There were no meetings. We couldn't meet each other in person. We couldn't brainstorm in person. None of that was going to happen. So a very core component of our team was suddenly missing. And I started noticing the effect of this very quickly. In the starting itself, in a lot of the meetings that we would have on Zoom or say Google Meet, people would not show up, people would not respond, people would just like join and not be active on the meetings. This was just commonplace that time. And this was not, we could not publish magazines like this because there was no building of each other happening. So it took me a month or so to realize exactly how we can figure out this problem. And of course, it was just talking to a few of my club members that I realized that one of the core things that was missing in our group right now was just constant meetings that would happen earlier in person. So I realized that communication channels were completely broken. Earlier, we would have just one WhatsApp group where all of our important stuff, as well as all of our just messing around, just texting and having fun, would just all be in one place. And this could not work in a virtual setting. So I started off with just creating a Discord channel, Discord server, and I created many sub channels inside that where I just added people and I started working off from that. And this made things organized from the very start. Later, what I also started to do was having weekly meetings with the group. And in these meetings, not only would we discuss what our current projects are, but we would also just have fun and talk to each other and just catch up on whatever's going on in each other's lives. Because of course, this was a very difficult time for a lot of people. And slowly but surely, our progress started to get back up. And we started working on our next magazine. At the same time, the team had also started participating a lot more and people had started giving in their ideas. And we started a podcast too. And that year we uploaded 2 magazines online. And we also started a podcast and a website where we would house all our work. So this was the impact of the work that was through the communication channels being improved and constant meetings being reinforced. Of course, this made the club a lot more fun place for everyone else to be. And what I learned the most from it was just, how important it is to keep everyone around and give them a sense of belonging in a club, which would not be there had it not been for this change that happened during the pandemic. So that's my story.
Cool. Okay, great. This was much better. This was much better. I still think that like the answer itself could be a little bit better. Like the one-liner where you talk about, I want to share a story when appointed chief editor. Okay, great. I think a more gripping one could be, I want to share a story about how I've led a team to success throughout the pandemic, or in a virtual only environment or something along those lines. Again, you're sort of giving the broader theme versus just like giving like the exact situation. I think it's a little bit more compelling, but again, directionally the story I think is in a better direction. And so I had a much better sense of like, okay, here's the group, they recruit 30 students, they publish magazines every year. I became this leader at the start of the pandemic. And then you started to go through the tension, like this group used to do things in person. And now with everything going online, like people just stopped showing up to meetings, people stopped participating, and they checked out. And so I now have to navigate this for myself. I have to figure out like how to be a leader in this online only environment. And what I recognize, and this is where you start to talk about some of the themes, what I recognized is that part of the reason that we weren't successful is because we didn't have like the organization, like the virtual organization to like actually coordinate projects. But the other reason is because as people moved to a virtual environment, like their reasons, their belonging and their purpose and a lot of these things were removed because that was something that they got from being actually present with people. And so as they checked out, as their purpose was removed, like as their interpersonal relationships were removed, they just checked themselves out from the group. So this is what I wanted to address. I wanted to address how to improve communication and how to improve a sense of belonging. And so these are the specific pieces that I sort of walked through in order to be able to do this. And at the end of the year, not only do we have a couple new magazines to show for it, but we also put together a podcast. And people ultimately were much more engaged. And so, and like what I basically, and then I love your takeaway, like what I recognize as a leader is not just how do we move towards a common goal together, but also how to give people a sense of belonging along the way to keep them engaged when you aren't actually able to be present in their face. And so I think that, again, like 80% of your story is good. If you can incorporate some of those elements, this becomes a very good story. So good job. Okay, let's do one more of these. Let's try this one. When was the time you had to make changes based on a new circumstance? So yeah, anyway, take a minute, think through, and then if someone wants to raise their hand and participate, we can workshop it just like we did with Saptarishi. Okay, great. Again, if there's someone that would like to participate and share a story, we can workshop it live. If not, I can hand the mic to Katie, and I can do one with her. All right, Katie, I think everyone else is ready to see you demonstrate your skills.
It's a hard question too, I feel.
It is a hard question. This is a new question, by the way. As of this year, McKinsey has pivoted it used to be like, tell me about a time where you built something. And now it's more, tell me about a time where like you had to make changes. And so building is, I think, a component of it, but it's the ability to react to new circumstances. And I think, honestly, I think the last story is really good for this, because it's like, okay, I was appointed this leader, and I was appointed a leader for a group that used to operate in this manner. And now I have to completely change the way in which we engage because there's new circumstances. And so I think that if you can think of some story like that has some element of that, that's kind of what they're looking for.
All right, I think I have one. I don't know if it's the best, but
Hey,
we'll go with it for.
No judgment here.
All right. All right. Do you want to frame me up just so I feel like I'm in the zone here?
Absolutely. Okay, Katie, it's great to have you today. We're very excited to be interviewing you. Heard a lot of great things. But before we dive into the case, I would just love to hear from you. When was the time you had to make changes based on a new circumstance that emerged?
Yeah, Kevin, really great question. As I think about this, one of the things that really stands out to me is my ability to look at a business sense holistically. And the example that comes to mind is when I was an analyst as part of a recruiting team. I had moved from a recruiting background where I spent 6 years, and I wanted a change. And the analyst role was that new way for me to communicate with different stakeholders, both internally and externally. One of the components of the role required very manual-based Excel reporting, and it was weekly, daily, monthly, right? There was a whole different series of reports. And thinking about how our business was growing, right? Hiring 4,000 folks a year, I needed to have leaders have on-demand access to reports and take away what they were comfortable with. And the idea that I had proposed to the team was we should move some of these reports to Power BI dashboards. This presented a large undertaking and a really big challenge for me because I didn't come from a very technical background. So my challenge was learning Power BI, showcasing the value of what leaders had held on for their comfort, right? They always had these reports that they could go back to and look to, but I wanted to give them something more. You can go in and look at your candidates and where they stand in the process and how quickly you need to move them along. In order to accomplish this, right, I had a 6-month goal that I had set forth. So what was the first thing I did? I started with some YouTube videos, looking at what were some ways that I could feed data that we had that wasn't clean from our applicant tracking system into a database like this. And then how was I going to transform it into impressive visuals that people could easily understand, both technical and non-technical? I picked up a book, Storytelling with Data, and I kind of looked at it from all aspects, right? Somebody that came from a technical background, how can I use that to my advantage? So I spent a lot of time, trial by error, to really overcome what I didn't know. Throughout that process, I made sure that I had conversations not only with my leader, but others that she was interfacing with, just to get a gut check, right? Am I in the right direction? Or what were some of the things that you needed to see change so that when time came for launch, I wasn't rolling out something that I didn't have the buy-in from my stakeholders. Overall, I was able to launch the dashboard within that 6-month goal that I had set for myself. It is something that is still in use today, and the role itself has expanded since this initial idea.
Taking my
Well, what
last
did I
note.
learn from the story? I forgot that. Oops.
Oh, good.
But I'll
Keep
pause.
going. No, keep going. Keep going.
What did I learn from the story? So when I think about this, it's a way to communicate with people, right? Not only from goals and aspirations that you have for yourself, but what does the business really need to do to move forward? And how do I communicate in a variety of different ways to meet the ever-growing demands?
Okay. So very organized. I like it. I was able to follow you the whole time. There's some ways to make this much more interesting, just to workshop it live.
Hard question.
Yeah, hard question for sure. So let's start at the one sentence answer. I'm not sure, it's a little too vague. And so I think the one sentence answer was something along the lines of, one of the things that stands out for me is my ability to look at the business holistically. Okay, I'm not totally sure what the theme is going to be. And as I think about this story, I think maybe what I would do is, one of the things that stands out for me is my ability to surface the insights that matter. Maybe that's a better way to frame it, because otherwise, like, look at business holistically, it's like, I'm not totally sure what that means. But sort of slight reframing sort of gives the interviewer a better sense of where this is going to go. So, and now you talk about the background. So, analysts from recruiting team want to change from traditional. I think that's good. What is missing from the situation tension is, like, what's the broader, like, change that needs to take place? You've talked about your own change, but I think in order for this to be good, there needs to be some existential change. There needs to be some, like, outside change or impetus for, like, why the business itself needs to go through this process, like this step function change in reporting. And you could say something along the lines, I'm just making things up, but you could say something along the lines of, with the increased demand for good talent in an ever decreasing talent pool on the heels of the pandemic, the way in which reporting was done no longer was sufficient. And the company really was not only struggling to gain talent, but hemorrhaging talent that it already had. And so it became incumbent on me, even being new in this role, to not only lean on the processes that were already in place, but to actually be able to adapt, to get ahead of the circumstance that the broader tightening labor market presented, in order to turn this from something that was a vulnerability of the company into a strength of the company. Like that, if I'm getting it directionally right, is a much better way to frame the situation and the overall existential shift that has taken place for why this new reporting is needed, versus you just saying, oh, and I wanted to sort of show how the business is growing, blah, blah, like, no, like what overall happened? Like, what's the broader threat or change that's transpired that has made it critical for you to actually do this? I don't know if that makes sense, or if I'm missing the mark a little bit.
Yeah, and I think I'll speak right on probably everybody, and we've all probably experienced this too, is the level of detail in which you need to explain for somebody that has no knowledge of your story, right?
Exactly.
I think we become very focused of, like, we're in this, but this detail doesn't matter. But those things, Kevin, that you shared, absolutely were some of those driving factors as well. So, but I'm like, yeah, for, practice with this, it doesn't really matter. Like,
Totally. Yeah. So, and this is why, it's so helpful to workshop with someone, because it's like, your story, the reason why, but if you don't articulate it, then it doesn't land the same way. And so the way that I interpreted your story, which, again, right or wrong, the way that I interpreted your story originally, if you'd only had one shot, and again, I know we're just doing this live, you didn't have much time to prep, is, okay, she did some new reporting. She studied hard. The new reporting went out. Cool. Like it's missing a lot of that. Like, why was this critical? What exactly, like, why was this needing to take place? And so I think that actually, like, once you start to workshop that a bit more and introduce some of those elements that I just talked about, then it comes to life. And so now it's like, okay, now we've got this burning platform as a company, right? There's this tightening labor market. We're struggling to be able to recruit and maintain people. And so we have to completely change the way in which we're looking at this. And me recently having stepped into this analyst role in recruiting was the ideal time for me to figure out how to marry existing processes with what the future of work looks like. And so here's what I did. I took this, and that step. I decided to go about it by doing my own research and also going about finding mentors, taking those learnings, pressure testing with mentors, and reiterating. And over the course of a 6-month process, we ended up launching a series of dashboards that provided X, Y, and Z additional insights to the recruiting team, ultimately yielding some improvement, like some X% improvement on recruiting or decrease in recruiting costs, like whatever, like give me more specificity if you can in the results. And then I think the broader takeaway here is, again, similar to the one that I just spoke to in the previous story, but I think the broader takeaway here is like, not only resting on, like, you don't have to like lean on existing processes just because they are like the way things have been done. You can take what you've learned from those and pivot it to the new environment to make sure that the company is best positioned for whatever the situation may be. Like, I think that's the overall takeaway here. And so again, I think the core of the story, like there's some really good parts of that. If you just tease those other elements out, I think you're in a much better position.
I love it.
Cool. Okay. We are running out of time. And so Bruce, I will stop doing this. I'll hand the mic back to you. And we'll go from there.
Great. Thank you. That was great. Fantastic. So let me share my screen and I'm going to go over the last few parts. Can everyone see that? Kevin, thumbs up. See that?
Good.
Okay, great. So let's ask questions related to recruiting. So where do you go from here? So there's a couple paths. One is on your own, or another path is with the help of a place like MCL. And given the number of people here, as you saw Kevin going through and speaking, the time that someone like Kevin gives to just the individual person, as you can see, it can take quite a bit of time for just one person. So we couldn't really help everyone. We couldn't customize it just for everyone on this call. So as part of the partnership with Simon Business School, we've set aside some time this month to speak with you personally and how to apply what Kevin showed you today to your specific background. Okay, so we can have a former McKinsey, Bain, or BCG recruiter create a custom plan for you on a call. So our goal in this call is to give you an insider's perspective on how to approach consulting recruiting in the most strategic way possible, because we've been there. 15 years, remember that, 15 years in recruiting. On the call, our goal will be to get you crystal clear on 3 things: your goals, your concerns standing in the way of your goals, and the exact steps you should follow to overcome those concerns and land a consulting offer. And since you stayed near the end, this is what we're giving you. We're giving you a free resource portal for Simon Business School students. And to claim the bonus, Kevin, are you going to paste that in the box?
Just did.
Okay, great. And then we can have some questions and answers with us. So I have a question for you, Kevin. If you have like the best story in the world, and this is an example of a story that I spoke with somebody, and she had gone to India and she realized there were a lot of people who needed prosthetic, who had lost limbs, and this is because they, I guess the infrastructure wasn't very well put in, and so after a big rainstorm, you could be walking by a puddle, and that could have been where the electrical line used to be hanging, but now it fell down, and all of a sudden you walk into a puddle that's electrified and you lose a limb. And she said she noticed that there were a lot of people in India that did not have, that had lost limbs. And so she wanted to raise money to buy limbs for these people, prosthetics. And she said, but then she quickly found out, $20,000. That's ridiculous. This is going to take forever. And so what she did was she went back home, she took some measurements, she went back home, and on a 3D printer, she printed out limbs. And she got little screws, and she made, and for $20, she made a limb for a person. She told me in her interview, she had this great story she wanted to tell, but the person never asked her anything that could prompt her to tell this story.
Mm.
Now, I imagine the last thing you want to do is hijack a question to tell a story that you think is wonderful. How would you have advised this person?
This is a very good question. So when you are going through, again, if you like go back to all those, like the set of like 10 questions you're likely to get, if you have a story that is that strong, I'm willing to bet that for probably a good chunk of those questions, you can weave in, like you talk about, it could be leading people, it could be pivoting to new circumstance, it could be like influencing others, it could be learning from failure. I mean, like you probably could, as long as there is an element of the question that is somewhere embedded in that story, you can nest that story into whatever it is. If it's totally irrelevant though, it's like, what do you do for fun? It's like, well, I go to India, I make, like prosthetic limbs. Like, wow, okay. I mean, you're kind of forcing it a little bit there. But for most of those questions, I'm willing to bet, especially for that story, you could find some way to weave it in. So you're right. Don't just jam it in where it's not necessary. It's like, why'd you join the squash team? Well, I was inspired when I went to India and I made prosthetic limbs. Like I've seen people try to do that and it's weird. But if it's natural, like it starts to be better. And look, again, like that's the purpose too of these initial interviews is like, you got a couple interviewers, in the early stages, there's usually multiple at-bats that you get. Like you don't usually have to like, oh, okay, well, I've got to get the story in with this question. And the one thing too that I'll tell you is that the fit will never, I want to say this the right way, but the fit's never going to get you the job, but it can certainly keep you from the job. Mm-hmm. If you cannot demonstrate the ability to showcase values, say it succinctly, like have some interesting arc to it, like that can keep you from the job. And so even if she isn't able to use her best story, I think that's okay if it more appropriately answers the question, because really much more of the interview is the case. So, and I think that's the next session you guys are doing. I'm not sure if it's me or if it's someone else, but it's a good question. Don't force fit something, but as you're going through like that brainstorming process across all the different questions, see whether or not there's some element of the story that marries with it well, and in which case you can use it. If not, don't touch it. Then it seems forced.
Okay. Okay. Oh, we have some, I think we have some chat going here. Oh no, that's the bonus link. Okay. Boy, you just, it's like landing the moon landing. You did this perfectly as far as like you ended it right at 7:30.
I definitely try to equate it to the moon landing. Yeah, that's that's how I determine the success of these meetings. Well, everyone, look, I really appreciate the time today. As you can tell, Bruce and I, like, we love doing this. Like Bruce and I are doing this again later today. But so yeah, if you have questions, like feel free to follow up with Bruce. I personally have worked with probably like 50 MCO students, but there's far more and better coaches than myself that are here. And the one last parting thought is like, and take a look at the resources. Like again, even if you decide not to work with us, that's fine. Like our general goal is like, when we were going through the process, what do we wish existed? And we wish existed like resources like this. And so like take advantage of what we've got for you, because we've spent hours and hours and hours and hours compiling this stuff. And so if you think it's valuable, great. If not, it was fantastic meeting you all.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Katie.
Thanks so much. Great job. And we will see you definitely next Friday, whether it's Kevin and Bruce or a new set of MCO folks, and we'll be diving more into case. So as you're seeing, this continues to build. So really great job.
Beautiful. All right. Thanks all. Cheers.
Thank you, everyone.